Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Anyegolu. Now, George Floyd's killing in America last year sparked global protests about policing, privilege, and a revolution in race relations. Those protests were spearheaded by the Black Lives Matter movement's campaign for equality and justice. That worldwide response has given confidence to a new generation that this time things could be different, and they may now have the tools, the allies, and the technology to create a new reality. But is the world ready to move beyond tolerance to become actively anti-racist? Or is the resurgence in far-right groups and plots exploring fault lines across Europe and America that are forcing the world to look again at the scale of racism in global communities and to explore more deeply what can be done to eliminate it for good? Is the loud and uncompromising message that Black Lives Matter enough? Well, for more of this, I'm delighted to say that I'm joined now from California by the co-founder of the global Black Lives Matter movement, Ay Tometi, who recently changed her name to Ay Tometi. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. An absolute delight to have you on the program. And first of all, I noticed, as I mentioned, that you've changed your name from Opal to Ayo, which is clearly a Nigerian name. Why is that?
Yes, well, first of all, thanks so much for inviting me to join you all today. This is a real pleasure to be in conversation with my community, and I am a member of the diaspora, the Nigerian diaspora, and so it, to me, is of prime importance to be sharing with our people. What I did just a few days ago was announce that I am changing my name from Opal to Aya, which actually Aya is my middle name, and it's the name that I was given at birth. It is Yoruba, as you know, and it means joy. And it was important to me to have this name change happen because I was really reflecting on this time in my life, on the entire pandemic, on what I'm really fighting for, what I'm really trying to invite into not only my personal life, but what I want the entire world to experience. And the struggle for justice at the end of the day for me, in my view, is so that we can all experience the joy that was, in fact, the way I say it is our birthright. It is our God-given right. And for us to be experience the fullness of our joy is to experience the justice, the equitable living, the lack of poverty that is rampant that we see in the world, the injustice that we see in the world wouldn't be taking place. We would be self-actualized, seated in our worthiness, seated in what we were designed to do and accomplish on the planet. And so for me, it was kind of my own personal, revolution, my own bit of a mantra that I wanted to be saying to myself each day. And I thought to myself, you know what? This thing is already part of me. It's already in my name. Why not claim it? Why not be called by it and invite more of that into not only my own personal life, but of course, like I said, the community. This is what we're really going for, because so often what happens is that we think that we're talking about justice as just, especially in the United States, oh, just stop killing us, just stop doing this. And it's such a limiting framework for understanding what the true aspirations and the goal of our larger movements are. To think that it's just a menial, we just want to survive. That's not it. We deserve to thrive. And so for me, this was a bit of my own personal wake-up call, but for sure an invitation for others to begin to reflect on what we really want, what we really deserve, what our real aspirations, goals, and dreams are. And let's begin to articulate that in public. Let's be bold, let's be courageous, let's be honest about where we're going and what's really required for us to get there.
Well, I have to say that you sound hugely inspirational there. I can see how you and your colleagues managed to inspire not just a generation, but the entire world. Let's talk about what you're fighting for and how you got into it. Tell us how you came to be a co-founder of Black Lives Matter.
Well, it is a long journey. And to be quite honest, I find myself as being part of a larger tradition of social justice and human rights struggle. The work that, we're doing now is really rooted in the tradition and history of people that came before us, from a Martin Luther King to a Marcus Garvey to a Harriet Tubman to Sojourner Truth, to Kwame Ture to Nelson Mandela. So many people, not only in the United States but around the world, have been really calling for the type of change and transformation, really, of our societies that we deserve. And so I'm part of this larger tradition. But I will say, as a first generation, Nigerian American, the daughter of Nigerian immigrants, born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona, which is in the Southwest United States, and growing up in the border region of the US, I have experienced firsthand, all kinds of discrimination. Not only have I experienced it firsthand myself, if it's, going to stores and being accused of shoplifting, or being passed up for certain opportunities, to people making fun of me or calling me names, or various things, but also to seeing that not only on the personal level but on the institutional level, that our people were being discriminated against. As a daughter of immigrants, I got to see firsthand specifically how immigrants were being treated in the US, and specifically Black immigrants, because of the color of our skin. And then on top of that, maybe our immigration status or our accents and those sorts of things kind of give us away as being the other, quote unquote, in this country. And so what I witnessed from a young age are my many aunties, uncles, either being harassed because of the color of their skin, driving while Black, being passed over for jobs that they were overly qualified for, but younger, whiter people were receiving those jobs that very easily should have been theirs because they're abundantly qualified for. To also hearing stories, sadly, of Nigerian immigrants having their young kids being shot and killed by police. So I've seen this in my own immediate community, in my own familial setting. I've seen this firsthand. And I became more and more active, particularly because I was feeling very pained and hurt by what I was experiencing, not only in the Black community, but I have a lot of friends who are also kids of immigrants, largely from Jordan, from Mexico, from Sri Lanka, and so I got to be in community with a lot of people who began to show me how difficult it can be in this country, how challenging it could be, how the quote unquote American dream can actually sometimes be a real nightmare for people. And because I had such love and admiration for so many of my peers and colleagues and people in my community, it was born out of my desire to love and support and protect them that I got more and more involved in activism. And for me, my story really begins as a middle school child, watching my parents fight against deportations in our communities, watching aunties and uncles struggle through that system, me being very curious about why in the world would they be tearing families apart? Why would this be happening? Why would people be saying these things about the color of our skin? So it was much more inspired by just kind of curiosity, but then a sense of righteousness, because I'm looking around and I'm seeing my friends, my community members, my aunties, my uncles, and my siblings, people that I love, that are so caring, contribute so much, do add so much value, and are inherently worthy of respect, of their dignity and their rights, that I was confounded at the fact that people would try to take their sense of dignity away from them, would bully them, would be violent towards them, would harass, and in some cases, violently harass. And as we know, people also get killed. And so my story really begins as a young person, but then going off into college, becoming very active in organizations and nonprofit organizations, grassroots organizing with immigrant rights groups, working with women in domestic violence shelters who were fleeing from abusive situations with their children, or single as well. So I was very involved with that early on. But once I began to see just specifically the story of Trayvon Martin, a young 17-year-old teenage boy in Florida, when I saw that he was stalked and killed by George Zimmerman, gosh, it was 9 years ago now, 9 years ago, yeah, 9 years ago now. And the fact that George Zimmerman was acquitted for the murder that we all knew he did. Everybody knew he did it. It was clearly all over the news. There was a case, there's a trial. And despite the abundance of evidence, despite the fact that the telephone operator, don't follow this boy, don't talk to him, don't harass him, despite all of that, despite all the warnings, the man who stalked and killed this young teenage boy was then acquitted, found not guilty essentially of murder. It was okay, it was justified. And I could not do more. Basically, I could not do any more. I wanted to scream, I wanted to shout, I wanted to completely transform the world, because I have so many young people in my life that I did not want them to think that what took place was okay, and that the adults in their lives would sit idly by while injustice was prevailing, essentially. And I have, at the time, my youngest brother was 14 years old. And I just did not want him to grow up looking at that news story and thinking that was okay. So it was very, very personal to me. I have two younger brothers. And so seeing Trayvon Martin, seeing, Mike Brown, seeing all these young boys and girls, right? Women, children, there's so many different types of people, different ages, different genders. Seeing these people, I just didn't want my immediate circle to think that this was okay, that we weren't going to say anything about it. And although I was already doing some form of organizing and was already very active in the community, I wanted to do more in that moment. And so, like so many of us these days, we go to social media. When something's going on, we go to social media. We log on, we share our thoughts and views, or we look for other ways that other people might be sharing their perspective, and then we respond. And in my case, I saw one of my fellow community organizers, somebody who was also active in the community. I saw her Facebook post, and essentially it read as a love note to Black people, and it said something like, Black people, I love us, our lives matter. And then Patrice Color, so that was Alicia who wrote that post, but then Patrice, who I actually didn't know at the time, she put a hashtag underneath that post. Yes, and then
well, I mean that's an extraordinary story. I don't mean to interrupt you there. We've got to take a break, but we're going to come straight back and we're going to keep talking with you. So stay with us. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with the co-founder of the global Black Lives Matter movement, Ay Tometi. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Anyekulu. Now, in America, if you're Black, you're 5 times more likely to go to prison than if you're white. And the typical white family has 8 times the wealth of the typical Black family. 50 years on from the promise of equality and the Civil Rights Act, the Black Lives Matter movement is now at the forefront of the struggle for a fairer system. The movement is not just calling for an end to police brutality, but also asking for something that had been pledged 50 years ago, racial equality. And it gives the shocking context to the anger felt by the millions of people who took to the streets during the Black Lives Matter protests. So how has the BLM used its platform as a global force to combat the profound racism in society? And the co-founder of the global Black Lives Matter movement, Ay Tometi, is still with me from California. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. Absolutely fascinating listening to you before we went on break, telling us of your personal evolution as an activist and how you came to form the Black Lives Matter organization. What do you think made that horrible incident with George Floyd resonate so much around the world. I mean, it was a very visual incident, wasn't it? Is that what woke everyone up? How realistic racial injustice is and what it actually looks like for black people?
Absolutely. I think that what took place last year that we all witnessed around the globe was abhorrent, it felt excruciating to witness a human being have their life taken in broad daylight in the streets of the United States of America in the year 2020, when everybody is navigating the pandemic. We're seeing that people are struggling around some other basic issues from health to economics and so on. And so the fact that even in this kind of context that we could see a Black person still being harassed, still being targeted, still being profiled, and then killed in broad daylight, I think sent chills up the spines of everyone who watched that video, and people who didn't watch the video, people who heard what took place. They knew that this was extraordinarily wrong, and that the fact that things could get to this level meant that something was so fundamentally wrong with US society that we would ever get to a point where somebody could be killed in such a manner in broad daylight on cameras after years and years of protests, after years and years of people talking about anti-Black racism and anti-Black violence. We would still see such a thing happen in the middle of a pandemic. I think people were just outraged and wanted to do something about it. And the fact that we were in the pandemic, in some ways, while it has been completely devastating to so many of us and to most of us, what I think was somewhat beneficial was that the fact that people were finally staying in one place for a moment, right? People were finally looking around and taking stock about, how is our society working? Is it working well? Is it working for all of us? What are the challenges that we're really navigating? What are things that are so fundamental that we must address in order for us to have a quality of life that we could say is dignified and is right, especially in the year of 2020, and a time where we have so much technological advancements, we have so much, advancements in if it's health, if it's other types of communications technologies and so on. We would think that we're so advanced. How then can we be still grappling with some of the most foundational questions about human value? What is a life valued at? And in the US, we can see time and time again that Black lives don't matter, right? And that was the indictment that BLM had to raise, way back when Trayvon Martin's killer was acquitted. And we continue to raise it time and time again. Mike Brown, Tanisha McBride, so many others who've been killed by police. And the fact is that it's not just police, it's also vigilantes, it's these white supremacists, white nativists, it's security guards and so on. We know it's not just that, but it's a deeper conversation about anti-Black racism and the quality of Black life, period.
Well, I mean, you've been doing quite a bit of Black Lives Matter now for a while, particularly in the last year. I mean, given all that you mentioned, how is the reckoning over race in America going today? I mean, it's now more than a year after the death of George Floyd and the protests which swept the US. Are the institutions doing a better job of reflecting a new perspective? Can you see a shift happening?
We are seeing a tremendous amount of participation in our movements these days. We're seeing a tremendous amount of people who understand that this work that we have to do is not solely about the criminal justice space or the judicial system or solely about policing, but it's really about the treatment of Black life, period, all across the board, every sector, every industry, everywhere that we must examine what is going on, because racism isn't an issue that is just unique to one institution. So what we've seen in the past year, I think, is people beginning to understand that. Beginning to understand that what we're talking about isn't just individual incidents of racism, but we're talking about systems change. And that to me is incredible. I've been so moved to see the amounts of people, millions and millions of people around the world recognize that this is what is going to be required. We must change every institution. And so we've seen that. We've seen people rise up. I would say, though, that we still have a ways to go in order to see all of that manifest, right? We still need to ensure that there are people who've, if they've said we're going to give this amount of money, or we're going to invest in our staff, or we're going to do this change, there's still a lot more to go, but we've begun to see the beginnings of that.
Well, I have to congratulate you. You've made tremendous progress on behalf of all of us. And you said there's a long way to go, but the progress has been most welcome. Ay Tometi, co-founder of the Black Lives Matter movement, thank you very much indeed for joining us there from California. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja and around the world, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.